Fetch. The last thing George Dixon expected or wanted to meet as an apartment on the 17th floor was this enormous Great Dane with an old tennis ball in his mouth. When Professor Wergner called, "Come on in," and George opened the door, the only thing that greeted him was the dog, who knocked him back against the wall. "Play with the dog, Dixon. I'll be out in a minute," the professor said from somewhere back in the apartment. With that, with that dog, you did what the dog wanted you to do. Throw the ball so he could go galloping around and bring it back to you. George had a lot on his mind than throwing a ball with a dog. 6 of his friends at Werner's archaeology class already had been interviewed for the job and been turned down. Now it was his turn, and he wanted to rehearse his speech. But the dog was jumping all over him and the furniture, dropping the drool-soaked ball on his best pants. Then the idea came to George. Took the slimy ball and held it up. "Okay, Fido, you're so smart. Go get this one." Instead of throwing the ball, George rolled it gently across the floor and with great satisfaction watched it roll under a low oriental chest placed beneath an open window. The Great Dane bounced across the room, his tail knocking a vase of flowers off the table. The dog did not stop, nor even slow down. With a sudden horror, George watched him leap from the floor. He cleared the top of the chest and went on. Stretched out, flying outside, a gentle rain was lit by the streetlights far below. The enormous dog sailed out into the rainy darkness. For what seemed a century to George, the body of the dog seemed to float in the air. Then it slowly sank out of sight, falling down through the rain. The Great Dane did not make a sound as he fell towards the pavement 17 stories down. For a moment, George just sat there, paralyzed with agony for the dog. Then he was on his feet, running, looking only at an open, dark, and empty window. Something grabbed his arm, stopped him in mid-stride, and spinning him around. "Come on," Professor Werner said. "I'm late for an appointment, so we'll talk in the elevator." "Wait," George begged, trying to pull his arm free. "Come on," the professor ordered, yanking him to the door. "No, wait," George said, but the professor pulled him out of the room and locked the door. Without a word, Werner dragged George to the elevator, shoved him in it, and pushed the button for the lobby. It was only after the elevator began to sink that George really understood the enormity of the thing. In his mind's eye, he could still see that beautiful dog sailing out into the darkness, and in his body almost feel the long, dreadful fall. Some of the windows the dogs would fall past would have lights on them. Some would be dark. The pavement would be wet with rain. Gradually, George realized that the professor had been talking to him all the time. They were going to dig in a remote cave in Kyrgyzstan. They might find gold artifacts of an inestimable value. There might be clues of missing chapters in the history of man. George couldn't listen to him, couldn't pay attention. The great dog, with the ball in his mouth, leaping so happily around the room, those huge soft eyes asking him to throw the ball, the dirty trick he had pulled on him. The professor kept on talking and talking. It would be rugged in Kyrgyzstan and dangerous. They would explore caves with deep holes in the floor, perhaps 1,000 feet deep, a hole down which some prehistoric man may have fallen 50,000 years ago. The dog had fallen now. Tonight, slowly as the elevator dial went past 10 and 9 and 8, George tried to erase the picture of the dog and think about himself, this job he wanted so badly, this interview on which everything depended. Had it been his fault? A dog had made a mistake and leaped out an open window. Had it been his fault? Was he to blame for that? Did he have to admit to it? Should he lose the job because of a dog, a dead dog? George realized slowly that the professor had been asking him a direct question. The elevator dial read 3. Dixon, the professor asked again, what's your definition of courage? It took all his mental strength to force his mind to pay attention. Courage, sir, or courage, I guess it's doing the right thing when you don't have to, even though no one is watching. Nobody saw anything. Werner laughed. That's a definition I never thought of. But it's not bad. Anyway, this expedition you and I are going on is going to take a lot of it. You and I, that's what he said, you and I. People would be standing in the rain now, looking down at the beautiful dog lying crushed on the wet pavement. The elevator stopped and the doors slid silently open. As Werner started out, George pushed the closed doors button and then turned and put both hands on Werner's shoulder, pushing him back against the wall. I killed your dog, George said. Werner stared at him. I was playing with him, throwing his ball. He went out the window, just out, into the rain. Werner said nothing as he pushed George's hands aside and then walked in front of the elevator and pushed the 17 button. The elevator going up made no sound at all, and Werner stood in silence with his back to George. He was a beautiful dog, George said. I'm sorry. Werner said nothing as the doors opened and he stepped out without looking at George and waiting for him. He walked down the silent corridor, unlocked the door, reached in and turned on the lights, and then, at last, turned and waited for George. Feeling sick and seeing again that dark, open window, George walked slowly into the room. A great moving weight struck him from behind, knocking him down flat on his face. For a moment, he just wanted to lie there, his face down on the carpet, his body waiting for more of attack he knew he deserved. Then something gently nudged him, and he turned his head. There was the Great Dane with that soggy tennis ball in his mouth, his tail flailing away, knocking things off the table. It was a mean thing to do to you. Dixon, Werner said, but I needed to know what sort of man I am taking on this dangerous expedition. George put his arms around the dog's neck and then got to his feet. There's a balcony outside that window, Werner said, smiling, and this mutt loves to show off.